Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're going to be going over all of my 5-star reads. So, I am actually a pretty harsh rater when it comes to giving 5 stars. I think I'm pretty generous with a 4-star. Like, if I enjoy a book a lot, I'll give it a 4-star, but to give it a full 5 stars is pretty rare. So, I went through my entire book collection, and instead of going by like what I rated books on Goodreads, I just kind of went through and said, what would I give a 5 stars like right now, like off the top of my head? And in total, I only have, okay, so I have 13 books here, but I have one book that I would consider a 5-star read that a friend has currently, so I can't actually like include it in this, but I would still consider it a 5 stars. So, I tend to be someone who really likes series, and the longer that I follow characters, it tends to make me fall in love with them even more, thus giving them a higher rating. So I do find that sometimes for standalones, it's hard for me to get as invested and find that I like it enough to give it that full 5 stars. Usually they end up being like a 4.5 if I really like it as a standalone, but there are a few exceptions to that. So I bought this book about a year ago, and I wanted to read it during a time that I wasn't going to be very busy with school, because I knew it was going to be very emotional and it was going to require a lot of my brain power, and I didn't want it to be interfering with other like requirements and responsibilities. Anyways, so the first 5-star that we're going to be talking about is A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. So this book follows 4 friends, Jude, Malcolm, JB, and Willem, and the main character is technically Jude, but you do follow all of their stories, and it's basically a story of them growing up, starting I think around college, and you kind of follow them as they go from being broke and start being established, but you also go through it's so hard to explain this book because it's a really emotional journey, and there's a ton of trigger warnings, so definitely check it before going in. I think a lot of people already kind of know somewhat the premise about it. It basically just talks about a lot of the trauma and how this trauma has affected this main character Jude's life, and how this trauma has kind of made him susceptible to experiencing similar traumas as he gets older, if that makes sense. A lot of people criticize saying there's too many like things added in for shock value, but I think it's kind of discounting the fact that some people are like this and do have lives like this, and I don't know, it's written beautifully and really heartbreaking. I remember when I finished this book, I was in the bath and I literally just had to put the book down and like cry in the bath for a good like 30 minutes, and then for the next day or two I was just in its weird mental state. It's not necessarily like a book you can just go into and you want to read on the beach. Like, it's definitely a very hard emotional read that you have to be kind of mentally prepared to get into. Okay, so the next standalone, and oh actually no, this is actually the first in a duology, but I haven't read the second book yet, and this is the most recent book on this list, and this is Firefly Lane by Kristen Hanna. So this book follows 2 best friends, Kate and Tully. So it follows them as they grow up from around middle school to maybe mid 50s, 60s, and you kind of follow them as they have very different lives, but then envy each other's lives, yet hate their own lives at the same time. I don't know, it's very hard to explain also. I mean, yeah, this book just covers so many life lessons that I think are relatable. I mean, this book talks about mother-daughter relationships, jealousy between friends, and then also like in relationships, and I don't know, I just think it's a really great read. Kristen Hanna's writing was super atmospheric, and like I said, because it does follow such a long amount of time, it starts around the 60s or 70s, I believe, but her writing is just so good at transporting you to a different time period, and like even though I wasn't alive, it still made me feel nostalgic and almost miss those kind of moments even though I wasn't even there for them, if that makes sense. And then so yeah, and then I wanted to say, so both of these books are technically about friendship, but they are about so much more than that. They have romance in them, they have like kind of found family, they have jobs, it talks about career. Especially in this one, I'm personally on the path to be a doctor, and one of the things that I've really struggled with is, you know, the fact that I'm not going to be done with school until I'm in like my mid 30s or late 30s, and it's kind of hard to come to terms with that, with also wanting to potentially have a family and kids. And I think this book explores that topic really well, of some women kind of really do want to start families and having kids and a husband is important to them. And then there's also some women who their career is the most important thing in their life and having a kids and a husband is secondary. And yeah, I don't know. I think this book really covers a lot, and again, trigger warnings, please check them before reading it. Alright, so the last standalone we have on this list, I actually did not rate 5 stars when I finished reading it, but since going to film this video and looking through all my books, this book just popped out at me, and I do think about it quite a lot. So that book is Normal People by Sally Rooney, and a lot of people do not like this book. It's definitely not for everybody. Sally Rooney's writing is not for everybody. She doesn't use quotation marks for dialogue, and I've heard that really throws people off, but for me, I don't know, after you read it for a little bit you start to pick up on it and it doesn't feel quite as weird. I just really fell in love with Marianne and Connell, and I liked how realistic their emotions and love story was. A lot of people complain about the miscommunication, but that's the entire point. I mean, how many times have you been or had a crush on somebody in middle or high school and then you didn't fully open up and tell them? Because that's how people are. We're afraid of rejection, and I think that this book kind of perfectly encapsulates that, and then also just kind of feeling insecure and allowing other people to take advantage of you in relationships. I think those themes are kind of like what makes this book just it's just so good. And if you can kind of not look at it like a love story and more of it like a lesson or even just kind of like a commentary on relationships, then I think you would enjoy this book a lot more. Okay, so those were my only standalones. I don't really have any romance 5-star reads. I do have a lot of them that I really liked or rated them like really high, 4.5, 4.75, but none that I would fully consider like a 5-star necessarily that are standalones. But one series that I've only read the first 2 books, and both of them I do consider them to be 5 stars, are Binding and Keeping 13, which are the first 2 books in the Boys of Tommen series. So these books are about Johnny and Shannon, and Johnny is a rugby player. Okay, so first of all, this takes place in Ireland. Johnny's a rugby player. He is 17, almost 18, and Shannon at the beginning is 15, almost 16. And Shannon has been bullied her entire life, essentially, and it's gotten to a point where she has to move schools because it's physically, like, she's been physically harmed. And so once she moves schools, she has a little run-in, you could say, with Johnny, and he just feels the absolute need to like protect and take care and save her. And I don't want to say too much because I don't want to get into too many spoilers for this, because I kind of didn't know that much, and honestly I feel like that kind of makes the reading journey even better. All I have to say is boom boom fucking boom. If you know, you know. These books are so good, so good. Okay, and I know they're huge, they look like they're really long, but honestly sometimes books like this are faster and easier to get through than other books that are way shorter. So I have to say, I really like how Chloe Walsh portrayed teenage boys in this book, because one thing that I will say about a lot of YA books is most teen boys are like assholes, you know? So not that they necessarily are in this book, but they're not going to be on their like best behavior all the time. They're going to be really silly, and I don't know, I feel like the way that she wrote the like guy friends in this book is probably like the most accurate that I've seen to my experience, at least. But yeah, I can't wait to read the rest of the books. Chloe Walsh has been teasing the next set to come out, and I don't know, it might be Gibbsy, and I am really hoping that it is. Okay, so the next romance series, which I don't know, it's debatable whether I would really call it a romance series or not, but that would be the Magnolia Park series. The first one in this is being lent out to a friend or my roommate, so she has that right now, but I still would consider every single one of these books a 5 stars. The way Jessa Hastings writes, I mean, there's really no author who's coming close to it right now. Like, she has beautiful writing, but then her story is also just like wildly entertaining and heartbreaking and funny, and it's so easy to like root for all of the characters. And so the first book in this series, you're kind of just being introduced to this world. You're being introduced to Magnolia and BJ, which are like the main 2 characters, and all of their friends, and then you're also being introduced to the families, and then basically just kind of having this really rich, wealthy world where, you know, buying designer shoes or clothes for your friends is normal and the way that you show that you love them. So anyways, this first book, you're kind of just being introduced to this crazy world and also just like the crazy dynamics between these characters. A lot of people compare this series to Gossip Girl, and I definitely see that. It is definitely very dramatic and kind of toxic, and there's a lot of weird friend dynamics, but honestly, like, it's so much better than Gossip Girl, and I really like Gossip Girl. Anyways, so, and then in the second book, which is about the Daisy hates, you're following Daisy, Christian, which is one of the friends, and then also Julian. And Julian is honestly probably my favorite guy character. Julian and Christian are like, BJ's great too, I can't lie, but like, something about these books. So again, I don't really want to say too much because I feel like the more blind that you go in, it's probably the better. It makes it more like exciting and dramatic because so much happens. So much happens. When I was reading these books, I literally read them all in like 3 or 4 days back to back to back because I could not stop thinking about this world and force myself to get out of it. And the way Jessa writes is just so lyrical, and I don't know. If you haven't, please read these books. The new covers just came out and I absolutely love that series. It's honestly probably my top series of all time. I think about it all the time. I think about the characters all the time. I want to be in that world all the time, and I want to reread it, but I'm waiting for the next book to, you know, read it before and refresh myself. Okay, so the last 5 books that I'm going to be talking about in this video are all by Miss Sarah J. Maas. She has the romantasy community in a chokehold, and I will never stop liking her books. So when I got back into reading again a little bit over a year ago, I started with fantasy. When I was younger, I was a big Percy Jackson girl, so back into fantasy was kind of just the easiest way to get back into reading. And I saw a lot online about this one particular series, and that was the ACOTAR series. So I picked up the first book. You know, the first couple pages, it's a little bit hard to get into, but then it starts picking up, and I absolutely fell in love with Feyre. I can admit that I was also a little bit of a Tamlin girly in the first book, but so again, with the series, it gets kind of hard to explain some of the later books without going into too many spoilers, but from the ACOTAR series, A Court of Mist and Fury and The Court of Silver Flames, I both gave 5 stars. This book picks up right after Feyre gets out from under the mountain, and she and Tamlin are engaged and they're about to have their wedding, and basically that's like the first couple chapters, and I don't want to go too much into it, but yeah, this book is absolutely amazing. It's a little bit of a slow burn. The Found family starts to develop a lot in this book, and yeah, this is probably like one of the best romantasy books that will ever exist, honestly. Sarah J. Maas just does something right. So the next book is A Court of Silver Flames. This is the last book that is out in the ACOTAR series. So this one is third person, but it does mostly follow the point of views of Cassian and Nesta. Nesta is Feyre's sister, and she's kind of the hated one of the group. She's kind of mean, she's a little bit self-destructive, she has very, like I said, self-destructive tendencies and behavior. She's drinking a lot, kind of just having a bunch of reckless activities at the start of this book, and throughout this book you're following her as she mentally heals, and it's also about her friendship between other women, that they all mutually empower each other, and it's also about Cassian. You see a little bit more about the bad boys, and as somebody who has had some mental struggles in the past and could kind of relate to Nesta's self-hatred, I personally really fell in love with her journey. A lot of people don't like her, and I can definitely understand that, but if you're someone who's kind of had some more mental struggles, basically if you've ever struggled in the same ways that Nesta has, I feel like you relate to this book and appreciate it so much more. But either way, yes, that is A Court of Silver Flames. Alright, so these last books are all part of the Throne of Glass series, which I read a couple months ago and absolutely loved. I don't know which I prefer, ACOTAR or Throne of Glass. I like them both for different reasons. So again, because it's the later books in the series, it's a little bit hard to give you a synopsis about what they are, but basically the 5-star books that I have from the series are Queen of Shadows, Empire of Storms, and Kingdom of Ash, which is the last book. Basically, the series follows Selena Sardathian, who is Adarlan's assassin. Everyone's reading order is different for this series. I personally read Assassin's Assassin's Blade 4th after Heir of Fire, and I personally liked it that way. Everybody has a different preference, so look it up on YouTube. A lot of people have made videos about the different reading orders that you can do, so just watch that if you're curious and want to read the series. But anyways, Throne of Glass starts with Selena Sardathian in Endovir, which is basically like a slave mine camp, and she's basically all of a sudden being called to, I think it's just like the capital, to be a champion for the king. So basically she enters this tournament, which basically just means that she's competing against a bunch of other crazy, not necessarily all assassins, but they're all, you know, physically strong, mentally capable opponents essentially. And then, so yeah, this is another one of those things where you just kind of find out a lot that happens as you go on, but the romance and the found family and see, I don't know. I have such a hard time like talking about series that are so long like this. Like, how are you supposed to condense like literally this much of page into a synopsis? It doesn't really work very well. But basically, like, this story is just about a badass main character. You're following her as she goes through all of these different tasks, as she meets all these different people. I think Sarah J. Maas tends to put her characters through a little bit of traumatic events, and they do definitely like rise and, you know, overcome them, but that definitely is like a big plot point in her books. And yeah, I don't know, you guys just please read every single one of the books that I mentioned in today's video. They're all definitely worth it. And I know none of these are necessarily like the most unique reads or recommendations, but if you haven't read any of these and they're on your TBR, or you've just been considering picking them up, please do so. Like, you definitely will not regret it. Alright, anyways, thank you guys so much for watching today's video. Let me know if you've read any of these books and what you thought about them, or if you're planning on reading them soon. And yeah, I will catch you guys all in the next one.